I noticed the Czech delegation the moment they stepped off the transit corridor onto Deck 6, and my first thought was not about politics. It was about the distance between them and Thessara. 42 feet, 6 Czech, 2 visible weapons, 3 possible concealed positions under those long coats. I adjusted my footing just slightly so that the shift of weight put me one step closer to her without drawing attention. Nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed. My name is Kale Duran. I was a diplomatic security attaché, Tier 3, assigned to Conclave Station Meridian, which floated in a dead zone between 4 sovereign star systems and belonged to none of them. The station was enormous, a turning wheel of politics and trade and old grudges dressed in formal language. 47 species passed through its corridors on any given rotation. I had memorized the dangerous ones first. I was human, which meant most species on this station considered me somewhere between a curiosity and a footnote. Humans had only been in the galactic conclave for 31 years. We were young by every standard that mattered out here. We were emotional, biologically unremarkable, and we had arrived at the galactic table with no great technology, no psychic gifts, no ancient history that anyone respected. What we had was stubbornness and an appetite for detail that most other species found either admirable or exhausting. Commander Owen Garrett, my direct superior, had told me on my first day aboard the station, "You are here because the Velhari requested a human escort. Do not ask me why. Just do not embarrass us." I had not embarrassed us. I had also not slept more than 5 hours at a stretch in 11 days, because sleep was the window where things happened that I had not planned for. Thessara was standing near the Eastern refreshment counter, speaking with a delegate from the Murith Collective. She was Velhari, which meant she was tall, about 8 feet, with pale silver skin that gave off a very faint glow at the edges, like the light that appears just before a sun rises. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and she communicated partly through small shifts of that light in her skin. Among her people it was called an empathic pulse. She could not read minds. She felt emotions the way a person feels warmth through a wall, aware that something was on the other side, but unable to make out its exact shape. She had told me once, early in my assignment, that I was the hardest human she had ever tried to read. "You feel muffled," she had said, and I had taken it as a compliment. The Czech were different. They were telepaths, and not the polite, distant kind. They read surface thoughts the way a person reads a sign posted on a door, easily, casually, without much effort. Their entire political strategy was built on this. They arrived at summits already knowing what everyone else was afraid of. It gave them leverage before the first word was spoken. Vox Haran was their lead emissary. He was shorter than I expected for a species with such a reputation, with pale gray skin pulled tight over a narrow face and eyes that were an unsettling yellow-white color, like old bone. He moved slowly and said very little, which in my experience meant he was gathering, not waiting. There is a difference. He had 2 aides with him, both Czech, both younger. One of them, a female I had not yet assigned a full threat level to, was scanning the room exactly the way I did, which immediately raised her ranking in my mental notes. The reception was formal. 3 dozen delegates, twice that many support staff, food that looked elaborate and smelled of nothing identifiable, and music from a species called the Havit that operated on a frequency just below conscious hearing. It was designed to be calming. I found it irritating. Anything designed to lower awareness was something I did not welcome. I tracked Vox Haran's movement through the room. He greeted 4 delegates. He declined food. He accepted a drink and did not drink it. His eyes moved in a pattern I recognized after about 10 minutes. He was reading the room but also reading the people inside it, skimming surface thoughts like a finger drawn through still water. I watched him reach 2 delegates near the window and saw the moment their faces tightened, just slightly. He had found something useful. I filed that away. Thessara finished her conversation and stepped back toward me. She did not look at me directly, which was her habit. She had learned early that looking at me drew attention to me, and attention to me was something neither of us wanted. "The Cheth leader has been looking at you," she said quietly, her voice low and smooth, like water moving over stone. "I know," I said. "He has been trying." She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when something surprised her. "Trying. He has been doing short reads on everyone in the room. He tried one on me about 4 minutes ago. It was brief." She was quiet for a moment. "Did it work?" "No," I said. I did not explain further, and she did not ask. That was one of the things I had come to value about working with her. She understood that explanations could wait, and that silence was not emptiness. Across the room, Vox Heron turned his head and looked directly at me. Not the casual glance he had given other delegates. A real look, steady and measuring, the kind that said he was thinking about something specific. I held his gaze and kept my face relaxed. I was not trying to challenge him. I simply was not afraid of him, and that was apparently readable even from across a room, because after a few seconds the corner of his mouth moved into something that was almost a smile. Then it stopped, not faded, not shifted, stopped like a light being switched off. He looked away first. I filed that away too. Later that night, in my quarters, I ran through the station map in my head for the 14th time that week. I knew every corridor between Thesara's suite and the summit chambers. I knew the maintenance hatches, the emergency bulkheads, the places where lighting panels had been recently repaired, which meant wiring was fresh and less reliable. I knew which delegates had brought personal security, what kind, and where those individuals tended to position themselves during open sessions. I also knew that the summit beginning the next day would bring all of it to a pressure point. The Cheth did not attend summits to negotiate. They attended to collect, and when they had collected enough, they squeezed. I lay on my bunk and looked at the ceiling and thought about the 2 corridors outside Thesara's suite, and which one was faster to reach from my position if something happened in the night. I did not think of it as obsession. I thought of it as math. I closed my eyes and ran the numbers again until I was satisfied, and then I let myself sleep. The summit opened in the conclave's main chamber, a wide circular room with tiered seating arranged by species and a central floor where representatives stood to speak. The ceiling was transparent, and above it the stars held perfectly still in the way they always did out here, far from any gravity worth measuring. I was in position 12 minutes before anyone else arrived. I used those 12 minutes well. By the time the delegates filed in, I had already counted the seating arrangements, noted 3 new faces on the Murith collective staff that had not been present at yesterday's reception, marked the positions of every Cheth aide in the room, and confirmed that the service corridor behind the east panel had been locked since early morning, sealed for maintenance, or sealed for another reason. I filed a quiet report to Owen and moved on. The opening proceedings were formal and slow. Declarations, acknowledgments, the exchange of recorded greetings from absent heads of state. I did not listen to the words. I watched the bodies. What people did with their hands and their weight told a more honest story than any prepared speech. Vox Heron sat perfectly still throughout. That was the tell. Most people shifted during long openings, adjusted their seating, exchanged glances with aides. He did none of it. He was not listening to the proceedings. He was working. His eyes had that slight unfocused quality that meant his attention was turned inward and outward at the same time, like a fishing line cast wide across a still pond. He was reading the delegates, all of them, systematically, beginning with those whose political positions were most valuable to the Cheth. The move came exactly when I had expected, roughly 40 minutes in, when a natural pause opened in the agenda. Vox Heron rose with the unhurried ease of a person who had already decided how the next 10 minutes would go. He addressed the chamber in a voice that was soft, precise, and carried without effort. He said that in the interest of transparency, the The Czech delegation was offering a voluntary surface verification, a brief empathic confirmation of sincere intent to any delegation that wished to participate. He called it a courtesy, a way of establishing trust before negotiations began. He paused, and his eyes moved across the room with what looked like patience, but was actually pressure. Any delegation that wishes to decline, he said, is of course entirely free to do so. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard in 11 days. He had not threatened anyone. He had simply made refusal feel like admission. I watched 3 delegation heads exchange glances. I watched one of the Murith representatives write something on a physical notepad, which meant he did not trust digital records in that moment. I watched Thesara, who sat very still, her skin light dimming slightly at the edges the way it did when she was choosing her words carefully. Vox Heron looked at her, just briefly, just long enough. I stepped forward. It was not a dramatic movement. I simply moved from the back wall to a position just in front of the Velhari seating section, close enough that my presence registered as deliberate. Then I spoke, keeping my voice level. Standard security protocol for the Velhari delegation requires that any individual seeking contact with the delegate pass through her attaché first. If the Czech delegation is offering verification, I will go first. A murmur moved through the room. Several heads turned. Vox Heron looked at me with an expression that was carefully neutral, which told me the question currently forming in his mind was not whether to agree but how to use it. He agreed. I walked to the center floor. Vox Heron stepped toward me. I felt nothing at first. That was important. Some species describe telepathic contact as a pressure or an intrusion. I felt nothing because I was not resisting. Resistance was noise. Noise was something a telepath could grab onto and pull. I simply thought about what I was already thinking about. He entered my mind expecting the usual architecture of a human. Most humans, from what I understood, thought in layers, emotional beneath logical, fears threaded through ambitions, noise and color and competing impulses all running at once. A busy, warm, slightly exhausting place to be. What he found was different. He found corridors. He found the 14 structural weak points I had already mapped in this chamber. He found the pressure door behind the Czech seating section that responded 2 seconds slower than the others, which I had noted during my morning walkthrough. He found the 9 delegates I had ranked by threat potential, organized not by species or political alignment, but by unpredictability, because unpredictability was the variable that caused the most damage. Then he found the distance calculation, the one that ran constantly, automatically, like a process I was no longer consciously aware of running. The calculation that tracked exactly how many steps I was from Thesara at any given moment. It updated every few seconds. It had been running since the first day of my assignment. I had not turned it off because I had not thought of it as something separate from breathing. He found the list of her routines, not because I found her routines interesting in themselves, but because deviation from routine was the first sign of a problem. He found everything cataloged with the precision of a field manual. All of it pointed toward her, not the way feelings point towards something, the way arrows point, the way maps point. Clean, functional, and absolute. Vox Heron withdrew from the scan faster than expected. His face stayed composed, but the aide I had flagged leaned forward and whispered something into his ear, and whatever she said made him go very still for just a moment before he recovered. He told the chamber that the Velhari delegation's attaché had been verified, and that he would continue with the others at their convenience, and he returned to his seat. Thesara said nothing when I walked back to my position, but her skin light shifted at the edges into a frequency I had not seen from her before. I had no word for it. I made a note to observe it again if it returned. That evening, a message appeared in the Velhari secure channel. It had been accidentally routed to my security feed due to a network configuration error that I suspected was not accidental at all. It was from Thesara's personal log. It read, "The human did something today I do not have a word for yet. He walked into a telepath's examination the way someone walks into a room they have already cleaned. There was nothing for Vox Heron to find that the human had not already chosen to show. I am not sure the human understands how rare that is. I am not sure I understand it either." I read it twice. Then I deleted it from my feed, flagged the network configuration for correction, and went back to my work. The explosion was small. That was the first thing I noted. It was designed to be small, which meant it was designed not to destroy but to scatter, which meant the target was not infrastructure. The target was movement. The device went off on Deck 4 at the 14th hour of the second summit day, in a service bay adjacent to the Murith Collective's temporary offices. It was loud enough to trigger the station's emergency protocols and send 36 delegates in 3 different directions. It produced more smoke than damage. All of it was deliberate. I was already moving before the alarm finished its first cycle. I had been watching the Murith Collective's new staff members since the morning session. One of them had spent 40 minutes near the sealed East Service Corridor. By the time he walked away from it, I had already reported his behavior to Owen and requested a sweep. The sweep had not been completed before the explosion. I took that as a learning point and kept moving. The summit chamber went from ordered to chaotic in under 30 seconds. Delegates moved toward exits. Security personnel moved toward delegates. In chaos like this, the single most dangerous variable was separation. If Thesara was separated from me, I would have to spend time finding her, and time spent finding her was time she was unprotected. I had planned for this. 3 different versions of this, because chaos had patterns if you watched for them long enough. She was not in her seat. I did not panic. Panic drained resources I had better use for. I moved to the secondary exit because it was the one a Velhari would instinctively choose based on approach angle and distance. It had a longer corridor before the first junction, which meant more time to think before choosing a direction. I found her in 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which was longer than I had planned but shorter than any worst-case scenario I had modeled. She was standing in a sealed corridor 2 levels below the summit chamber, near an emergency bulkhead that had engaged automatically during the lockdown. She was alone, uninjured, and very still. She looked at me when I arrived, her skin light steadied. "You were 4 minutes," she said. 4 minutes and 11 seconds, I said. "The east stairwell was blocked. I had to go around." She studied me for a moment. "You are not out of breath." "I ran those stairs twice this morning," I said. "Same route." The emergency lighting in the corridor was dim, a flat orange that made the silver of her skin look warm in a way the regular lighting never had. The alarm outside had dropped to a low, steady pulse, which meant the station's security team had contained the situation, but had not yet cleared it. "We had time," she said, Kale. It was the first time she had used my given name without rank in front of it. I noted it. "Yes," I said. "Why do you think about me so much?" I considered the question. Not the answer, the question itself, what had brought her to ask it here in this corridor at this specific moment. She said before I could answer, "I am Velhari. I do not read thoughts, but I feel echoes. For 11 days I have felt an echo from you that is unlike anything I have felt from any other being on the station. It hums, Kale, constantly, and it is tuned to me." I thought about how to explain it in a way that was accurate rather than comfortable. "When I protect someone," I said, "I have to learn them, not the way you learn facts. The way you learn a place you live in. You stop looking at it consciously because you already know where everything is, and the moment something is different you feel it immediately, not because you are looking for it but because it has changed from what you know." She tilted her head, left side, just fractionally. She was about to ask something that mattered to her. "And you have learned me that way," she said. Yes. How much of me? I thought about it honestly. The way you stand when you are tired is different from the way you stand when you are choosing to appear tired for political reasons. Your voice shifts slightly in pitch when the person speaking to you is saying something you already know. You blink for a half second longer than usual when you are deciding whether to tell the full truth. Your skin light drops at the outer edges when you are angry but rises at the center, which is the opposite of what it does when you are pleased. She was very still. I know which exits you move toward when instinct takes over, because your instincts favor space over cover, which means in a crowd you move toward openings. That is a vulnerability. I compensate for it by positioning myself to funnel you toward cover instead, so that your instinct and the correct choice point in the same direction. The corridor was quiet, except for the distant pulse of the alarm. That is not sentiment, I said. It is methodology. She took a slow breath. Among my people, there is a level of mental orientation toward another being. It requires years of practice among Velhari to develop. It is considered a form of devotion so complete that our scholars argue about whether it remains a choice after a certain point, or whether it becomes its own kind of instinct. She paused. I now believe it can arrive as instinct first, without the practice. I believe I am looking at an example of it. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I looked toward the bulkhead and listened to the alarm. You did not do this deliberately, she said. It was not a question. No, I said. I did it because it was the correct way to do my job. That, she said quietly, is exactly what our scholars would find most extraordinary. The lockdown lifted 12 minutes later. We walked back to the summit chamber in silence. 2 levels above us, I would later learn, the Cheth inner circle was having a very different conversation. Vox Heron had shared what he found in my mind during the scan with his senior advisors. A conclave security contact told Owen 2 days after the summit ended, and Owen told me. The Cheth advisors, who had collectively read thousands of minds across dozens of species, had listened to Vox Heron's account and gone very quiet. One of them had referenced a Cheth proverb. Owen did not know the original language, but the translation was roughly this: a telepath fears nothing more than a mind that has already decided. I thought about that for a long time. Vox Heron did not make small moves. I had understood that from the beginning. He was patient the way dangerous things are patient, not because he lacked urgency, but because he understood that timing was a weapon, and he was not ready to use it yet. He was ready on the 3rd day of the summit. The session had gone long, running almost 2 hours past schedule due to a dispute between the Murith Collective and a delegation from the Vetharun system over shipping corridor rights in a sector neither of them fully controlled. It was the kind of argument that generated heat without producing light, and most delegates were tired by the time the chamber finally cleared. I was not tired. I had slept 4 hours and spent the remaining time reviewing security footage from Deck 4, because the sweep of the East Service Corridor had turned up a second sealed access panel that did not appear on official station schematics. Someone had added it quietly, with enough access to do it cleanly. I had reported it to Owen and 3 station security officers, and was still waiting for a response that felt adequate. It had not come. Thessara left the chamber with 2 members of her support staff, heading toward the Velhari suite for an evening briefing. I was 3 steps behind her, the correct distance, close enough to act and far enough to not crowd the space she needed to work. Vox Heron fell into step beside me. He did it smoothly, as if we had made plans to walk together. He said, without looking at me, "You are more interesting than I expected from a human, Kale Duran." "I hear that occasionally," I said. "I would like to speak with you, privately, a few minutes only." I checked Thessara's position, calculated the distance to her suite, confirmed that the corridor ahead was well monitored, and that her 2 staff members were capable individuals with no threat flags on their records. 5 minutes, I said. We stepped into a small observation alcove off the main corridor, a recessed space with a viewport that looked into the dark between the station's outer ring and open space. The stars beyond were very still. Vox Heron stood with his hands clasped behind his back and looked out at them. "I want you to understand that what I am about to do is not personal," he said. "It is professional." Then he looked at me. The second scan began. This one was not like the first. The first had been a surface skim, quick and wide, gathering broad information. This was different. I felt it the way you feel a shift in air pressure, not painful, not intrusive in the way I had expected, but present, definite, a weight settling behind my eyes and reaching carefully inward. I did not resist. Resistance was noise. I thought about what I was already thinking about. He went deeper than the first time, past the maps and the distance calculations and the ranked threat assessments. He moved through them like rooms in a house he had already visited once, and I could feel him searching for something he had not found before, something softer, something he could use. He found it. It was not something I hid. I did not hide things because hiding required energy and energy was finite. But it was something I did not dwell on, because dwelling on it served no practical purpose. It sat at the bottom of everything else, quiet and specific and entirely honest. What if I am not enough? What if I miss something and it costs her everything? It was not a new fear. It had been there since the first day of my assignment, when I had read the words, "high-value target," in a dry security file, and looked up at Thessara standing across a crowded welcome hall, composed and entirely unaware. And something in my mind had quietly shifted its axis without asking my permission. The fear was the engine. It was the reason for every early morning and every extra corridor sweep and every hour of footage reviewed in the dark. I was afraid of failure the way a person standing at the edge of a very long drop is afraid of it. Constantly, clearly, and without drama. Vox Heron came back from the scan. He looked at me with an expression that was not quite satisfaction, but was close enough to recognize. "You are afraid you will fail her," he said. His voice was smooth. He had been building toward this sentence. He expected it to land somewhere soft, somewhere it could take root and grow into doubt, and the doubt could be used. "Yes," I said. The simplicity of it stopped him for a fraction of a second. "That fear is your weakness," he said. "No," I said, "it is my reason. There is a difference." He studied me. The muscles around his jaw shifted, a very small movement that told me he was adjusting his approach. "You are a human diplomatic escort," he said. "Tier 3. You have no political authority, no significant species backing, and no leverage in any room at this summit. And yet you have placed yourself between the Cheth delegation and the Velhari delegate at every possible opportunity." He paused. "That tells me you either do not understand the scope of what you are opposing, or you do not care." "I understand it," I said. "Then you do not care." "What I care about is simple," I said. "She walks out of this summit intact. Every decision I have made has been in service of that. I am not opposing the Cheth delegation. I am doing my job. If the Cheth delegation keeps finding itself between me and my job, that is an observation about the Cheth delegation, not about me." His expression did not change. But the aide I had flagged on the first day, who I had spotted standing at the mouth of the alcove at what she probably thought was an unobservable angle, shifted her weight slightly. "The Velhari trade routes are worth a great deal," Vox Heron said. "I am sure they are," I said. "That is not my department." "Protecting her from political pressure is also not your department." "Protecting her is my department," I said. "The source of the pressure is yours. Those are two different things, and I suspect you have always known that." He looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I counted the seconds. 7. "You know this cannot end with a single human escort holding a position," he said. "The forces at work here are larger than any one person." Most forces are larger than me, I said. I find it irrelevant. He tilted his head slightly. And if your government orders you to stand down, if your commander receives instruction from a higher level to soften the Velhari delegation's resistance to compromise, then I will follow the lawful orders of my chain of command, I said. And then I will request an immediate transfer to private security, apply to the Velhari Employment Registry, and be standing in the same corridor I am standing in now within 72 hours. The silence that followed was the kind that meant I had said something he had not modeled for. He recovered quickly. He said, "You are either very loyal or very simple." "I have been called both," I said. "I stopped minding either one a long time ago." He started to say something else. He stopped because his aide had moved from the alcove entrance to his side and was speaking in their own language at a low, rapid pace, and whatever she was saying made the muscles around his jaw tighten in a way that was not fully controlled. I let him have the conversation. I stood with my hands relaxed and my weight even and looked at the stars through the viewport and thought about the access panel that had no business being on Deck 4. When Vox Heron looked back at me, something had changed in his posture. Not much, just enough. "This conversation is concluded," he said. "All right," I said. I walked back toward Thesara's corridor at a steady pace and did not look back, because looking back would have told him something about my certainty that I preferred he not know. 3 hours later, Thesara filed a formal complaint with the Conclave Ethics Committee. The complaint cited unauthorized telepathic contact with a registered diplomatic security officer during an unsupervised private meeting, in violation of Conclave Code 47, subsection 9. It included a full audio and biometric record of everything that had been said and done in that alcove. I had been wearing the recording sensor since the first day of the summit. It was standard equipment for my tier. I had simply never mentioned it because nobody had asked. The Conclave security officer who received the complaint told Owen the evidence was, in her words, extraordinarily clean. Owen messaged me that evening. The message read, "I do not know whether to be impressed or alarmed Duran, currently leaning toward both." I did not respond. I was reviewing the station schematics again, looking for any other panels that should not be there. The formal proceedings against the Cheth delegation began the following morning and moved quickly, which in conclave terms was unusual. Conclave legal processes typically stretched across months. Formal violations of telepathic conduct codes were among the few categories that moved faster, because the entire basis of multi-species coexistence in the conclave depended on the agreement that minds were sovereign. A species that read minds without consent was a species that could not be trusted in any room with anyone. Vox Heron knew this. He did not fight the complaint. He acknowledged the violation, filed a formal diplomatic apology, and withdrew the Cheth delegation's participation in the remaining days of the summit. His statement, issued through official channels, cited procedural misunderstanding, which everyone present understood to be the diplomatic language for being caught and choosing to lose small rather than lose everything. The complaint cost him more than a reprimand. 3 delegations he had been quietly gathering leverage over, upon hearing about the violation, reviewed their own summit interactions with the Cheth and filed supplementary reports detailing moments of pressure and psychological manipulation they had not previously reported. Those records would take months to process, but they existed now, on file, permanent. Owen called me into his office on the morning of the final summit day. He was a broad man with gray at his temples and the kind of face that had seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. He sat behind his desk and looked at me for a long moment before he spoke. "The sensor recording," he said. "Standard issue," I said. "You wore it to a private meeting that Vox Heron arranged under the assumption of off-record contact." "I wear it every day," I said. "He arranged the meeting, he chose the setting. I did not tell him what I was wearing. Owen looked at me. That is a very thin technical distinction, Duran. It is an accurate one, I said. He was quiet for another moment and then said, 3 delegations have privately requested human security personnel following the events of this summit. Not because of what you did, because of what Vox Heron found when he scanned you. He paused. Word moves quickly on the station. By the time the second day of the summit ended, half the chamber had heard a version of what the Cheth emissary found inside a human's thoughts. Are you aware of this? I suspected it, I said. The Velhari ambassador sent a personal communication to the human diplomatic mission this morning recommending you for a commendation. I said nothing. What is your current read on the threat level to Delegate Thessara? He asked. Significantly reduced, I said. The complaint has removed the Cheth delegation's operational momentum and placed them in a defensive position. Any move against Thessara now would be directly connected to them, and they cannot absorb that consequence. Secondary threats remain. Specifically, the undocumented access panel on Deck 4, which station security has still not fully accounted for, and 2 of the 3 new faces on the Murith Collective staff, whose behavioral profiles I would not clear for unsupervised access to restricted areas. Owen wrote something on the pad in front of him. Submit a full written report by end of day. It is already submitted, I said. I sent it at 600. He stopped writing, he looked at me. Of course you did, he said. I was released from the meeting with no further action and went back to my post. The final summit session was brief. Agreements were signed or sealed in the manner appropriate to each species present. Formal declarations were recorded, and the chamber cleared by early afternoon. Delegates and their staff began departing the station in stages, which meant the corridors filled with movement and noise, and I moved through all of it, tracking Thessara's position without a break. She was composed throughout, doing the work of a diplomat without visible strain, speaking with representatives, exchanging the appropriate greetings, performing the various forms of physical acknowledgement required by species whose customs demanded it. She did not look tired. She was choosing to not appear tired, I knew, because this was the final day and appearances carried more weight at a close than at any other point. I stayed 3 steps behind her and let her work. It was late in the station's evening cycle by the time her schedule finally cleared. Her staff returned to the suite to begin preparing for departure. Her 2 most trusted aides, a Velhari male named Soren and a human woman named Petra Wynn, who served as her administrative coordinator, were sorting through documents and cataloging gifts from delegations, and the suite was quieter than it had been in 5 days. Thessara stepped out of the main suite room and into the small side corridor that connected to the observation annex, a narrow space with a curved viewport and 2 seats that had never once been used during the entire summit. I followed at the standard distance. She looked at the stars. I stood at the door. After a long time, she said, "Sit down, Kale." I sat. The stars outside were the same ones I had looked at from the alcove with Vox Heron 2 days earlier. At this distance from any system, they moved slowly if at all. I found it easier to think near open space than near any other view the station offered. I spoke to Velhari scholars, Thessara said, through a secure channel this morning before the final session. I waited. I described to them what I had felt from you over these 12 days, not the events themselves, only the quality of the feeling, the direction of it. She paused, and her skin light moved in a slow pulse I had not catalogued before. I wanted to understand what to call it. Our language is precise about this kind of thing. We have spent a very long time developing words for the ways one being can orient toward another. I was aware that I should probably say something, but I found that I had nothing useful to offer yet. She said, the closest term is verathsal. It is an old word. It does not translate exactly into any trade language, but the nearest version in standard is, the one who has made you their sky. I looked at the stars. In Velhari culture, she said, Varathsal is something that takes years of deliberate practice to develop. It is considered the highest form of orientation one being can hold for another, not possession, not dependence, simply complete voluntary alignment. The way a world faces its star, not because it has no choice but because that is what it has become. She turned toward me. Our scholars believed it was always a discipline, a practice requiring cultivation and time. They had never once considered that it might arrive as instinct. I thought about that. I thought about the first day I had walked into her briefing and read the words high-value target in a dry security file, and looked up at her across a crowded hall and felt something in my mind quietly shift its axis without asking my permission first. I did not set out to do it, I said. I know, she said. That is exactly what I told them, and they were quiet for a long time. I looked at her. In the viewport light, her skin was doing the thing it did when she was processing something that had no match in anything she had processed before. I had cataloged that particular shift only twice prior to this moment. They asked me whether the human was aware of what he was doing, she said. What did you tell them? I told them you were aware of every practical consequence of it and entirely unaware of what it meant. She paused. They said that was the most honest thing a human had ever done. I did not know what to say to that. I looked at the stars. The silence was not uncomfortable. With Thessara, it had never been uncomfortable. That was something I had noted early and valued without analyzing it too closely. She said, after the summit events became known through the station's informal channels, I received 3 private communications. From the Havit delegation, the Murith Collective, and an independent trade group from the Veth Arun system. All 3 requested information on the process for attaching a human security officer to their diplomatic staff. I heard something similar from Owen, I said. They were not requesting humans because of your actions during the summit, she said. They were requesting humans because of what Vox Heron found in your mind. The story moved faster than I expected. By the second day, most of the chamber had heard a version of what the Cheth emissary found inside a human's thoughts, that he had entered with every advantage and found nothing but structured, sustained, absolute focus on the protection of one individual. She turned to face me more directly. Do you understand how the other species interpreted that? I have some idea, I said. They were not moved by the tactic or the strategy, she said. They were moved by the fact that it was real. Vox Heron did not find a trained response or a suppression technique or a performance of any kind. He found something a telepath with all his skill and experience could not manufacture or manipulate because it was not a feeling or a thought. It was a state of being, a complete architecture of purpose built around a single point. She paused around me. I said it was my job to protect you. Yes, she said, and somewhere along the way your job became the same thing as your instinct, and your instinct became the same thing as your orientation, and all 3 became the same thing as who you are, sitting here right now. She looked at me steadily. No one does that on purpose, not in 12 days, not in 12 years among most species. You did it because it is what you are built for. I turned that over carefully. I was not certain I agreed with the full scope of that claim, but I was also not the most objective person to evaluate it. The scholars I spoke to, she said, want to write a paper about you. That sounds uncomfortable, I said. I told them you would say something like that, she said, and something in her voice came close enough to warmth that I filed it carefully, in the place I kept things I did not yet have words for. She said, I have submitted a formal request to the Human Diplomatic Mission for a permanent assignment extension. I ask that you be attached to my staff for the full duration of my tenure at the Conclave, which is currently scheduled for 2 years. She paused. I want to be honest with you. I submitted it not only because you are effective at your work. I submitted it because I have spent 12 days feeling the echo of a mind that has made me its entire orientation, and I find that I am not indifferent to that." I looked at her for a long time. "I would have submitted the same request," I said. "I know," she said. "Owen told me you had already drafted it. He said you sent it at 600 this morning, same time as your incident report." "I like to be efficient," I said. The quiet that settled after that was the kind that settles, not the kind that waits. Outside, the stars held their positions, and the station turned its slow circle in the dark between systems, and somewhere below us the last of the Czech delegation was loading equipment and preparing to file the paperwork of a graceful defeat. I thought about the 12 days. I thought about the corridors memorized and the routines cataloged, and the distance I calculated constantly without ever consciously thinking of it as calculation. I thought about a fear that had never once been an obstacle because it had always been a direction instead. My official new orders arrived in my queue at 22:47 station time. Permanent assignment. Velhari diplomatic staff. Attached to Senior Delegate Thesara. Effective immediately. Duration to be reviewed annually. Signed by Owen. Countersigned by the Human Mission's senior diplomat. And noted with a brief addendum stating that 3 additional delegations had requested similar human attachments, and that the mission was, per the addendum's exact wording, evaluating the expansion of this assignment model. I read the orders once, filed them into my secure archive. Looked toward the viewport where Thesara's ship sat docked at the station's outer ring, its running lights steady and unchanged against the dark. Then I pulled up the schedule she had filed with the station's departure coordination office that morning, the one covering their travel to the next conclave session, beginning in 4 days at a station in the Vetha-Rune corridor. I had already memorized her schedule. I was already thinking about the layout of that station, the corridors I had not yet walked, the exits I had not yet mapped, the distances I had not yet calculated. I was already making her my sky. I closed the file and looked at the stars and thought, good, this is exactly where I should be. And then I started working.